round shapes, just on average, right? You might have round shapes in the image, but generally round. And I'm taking one in four here. I think one's probably my favorite. I'll come up with this. I think it's making me think of another piece that we'll probably want to incorporate as well, which is focused on like choosing the moment and like when you think, because humans, they generally like they'll think in somewhat of a GIF. Like you'll get an impression of a moment, it'll be moving, you'll kind of get multiple like maybe angles of that history experience, or either before, during, or after the action, and being really clear about where we are. Like as a viewer, I'm trying to understand, where is she right now? Is she charging over this, about to swing the sword? Did she just swing the sword and she's on the upswing now, and that's why this guy is falling? And so really getting standing to, as okay. Yeah, so I use a lot of like when in one of the classes that I kind of pulled up before, use the swing, and if she's coming over this hill and about to chop down, I think this is a place where we'd want to have maybe instead of having this guy falling back,
is a little confused and we're not making the most of it. I would love to see what it looks like for Xena to be both finishing her chakram throw and preparing to open hand from throwing
over here. And so that's one thing that we'd want to kind of figure out. And then here too, it's unclear as to whether Xena's like in an action or whether she's in like an anticipation or a wind up. And so the relationship between these two isn't super clear. And so those are the things we're like making choices on for each one of these stories. You've got this story here, you've got this story here, you've got this story here, and then maybe this is kind of like a little bit of a sub-story or something in kind of the background. Choosing how you want these relationships to be set up so that they're just really, really clear the second that the viewer really takes a look at the image. So with that, some things that you can do to really make this clear, like having an arc, a blood or something that's kind of, sweeping through, and then, getting something there. And, you can have the rhythm of this, be a thing that maybe we don't have like this crazy amount of blood, but the spatter at least is really kind of giving you this arc, that shows the trail. This is a place where as you're, I think we've got the hands reversed here a little bit, like as she's coming across with this sword, you just got to be thinking about, where those arms are placed and what that follow through is going to look like. I think when you've got like a broadsword like this, instead of, kind of like a big Zweihander or something like that, I'd probably look at, maybe separating the arms. I don't know if you'd want to do this like in reworking the piece, but getting kind of a sorry, I keep tapping my microphone here. Getting maybe bringing the shoulder down, or she's got this arm in her. Yeah, I probably want to rework the pose just because this arm cutting off the bottom of her jaw also really kind of removes a lot of the drama from her like yell. And so, if you have like kind of an arc to her back, you've got her back shoulder out here, you've got the front shoulder here, and she's kind of reaching forward, and this back arm, has the sword up here, and you can kind of see this so you get almost that whole follow through, right? Where she kind of backhand, the sword through this guy. You get this arc all the way up here, and then we have more of this this arm coming down. Can probably lower the head a little bit. Just basically as ways to kind of strengthen up this pose a little bit. She's just feeling a little kind of twisted around, and we're not getting a clear understanding of like where her shoulders are in relation to her hips, in relation to her head, as it pertains to this action. Right now, her head is mainly facing. This is kind of a thing to avoid whenever you're putting an action pose. We've got the head facing this way. We've got the body mainly facing a slightly different direction, and the hips facing pretty much the same direction, right? And so you've got an action pose where the head, the torso, and the body, like the hips, are all pretty much facing the exact same direction. So this is where, you know, as I'd be doing this, I'd probably drop the shoulder here. Even if you did want to keep the two arms here, I'd probably drop this shoulder and really kind of twist the hell out of the torso and show, you can show like the back even. Bring this shorthand that. But really kind of getting the shoulder over so that we can see maybe some of the back here too. That's really broken now, but. And then having the hips also kind of skew so that we get a little bit more of you know, this motion. I think this is mainly around kind of when I look back at the thumbnails here, I think he had some clear, like a much clearer pose, you know, in here. This I can't, like she's kind of, she looks like she's surveying, you know, what's going on and about to strike, which could work. It's a little bit more of like an iconic as opposed to like an action-oriented pose. I feel like your pose was much stronger here, and we're getting a little kind of turned around, you know, as we move into this this third one here. Other things here too, as you're kind of looking at all of this, we need to kind of find where we want the lines of action to be for kind of emphasis or like angularity, because right now with everything, we've got kind of everything being slightly curved. And we're using these round shapes everywhere. She's not that bad. Like she actually kind of uses a little bit more angularity in her shapes. You know, you're getting, you know, you're getting a little bit more of this, you know, where the bone kind of meets the structure, which is great. But then when we get back down to these characters down here, again, these guys are supposed to be like the mean, scary, you know, bad guys that she's gonna fight. But everything that about them that you're telling me with their shapes is that they're super friendly and kind of don't really fight that often, right? They're very kind of round and safe for kids. And so as you're doing this, like really kind of thinking about how am I going to get the angularity in there, you know, remembering you've got your kind of three basic building blocks of design. You've got your triangle, you've got like your square. We'll start with that one just to kind of make it clear. And then you've got your circle, right? Your square is going to be formidable, strong, rigid, immovable, you know, overall like steady. You've got your triangle, which is going to be, you know, agile, scary, dangerous, swift, you know, all of kind of the action and dynamic oriented. So they're almost kind of the antithesis of each other, for the exception of like this kind of has a little bit more of a negative orientation, and this is a little bit more neutral. And then, you know, you've got your circle, which is much more of a positive orientation. It's friendly, it's serene, it's peaceful, And so as you're kind of working on a dark fantasy style image, you really don't want to be filling it up with, your circle shapes. I would reserve circles or curves or things like that to really focus on the areas where you're trying to either draw contrast or things that you're specifically trying to show as like the protagonist or friendly or things like that.
What it puts me in the mind of is apparently I was actually able to find an ArtStation the Always Sunny in Philadelphia season key arts that often like reference action-packed or dark fantasy stuff, and then round it out really hard, and it winds up having kind of that softer, almost like visually safe and implying comedy feel.
Yeah, I think that's kind of it. Is it feels a little bit like a parody because of all of the round shapes and things like that that are going on. What else? Yeah, so if I were to take a crack at this, you probably have your head here really kind of leaning into this back here, so that we've got this kind of maybe even showing the reverse of this actually. So you get that twist. And then we can probably, get a little bit more of the hips splayed out here.
I definitely think pelvis, like pelvis studies are the things that I've been specifically recommending people to do week over week lately. Is figuring out the how key it is the attitude of the shoulders versus the attitude of the hips, and not letting pelvises be tubes or just hidden under clothing and costume with legs sort of ambiguously emerging from them, but instead building out a really physical, well-constructed bottom half of the character is so important for getting that weight and believable proportions.
Yeah, this is another thing too. Like when I look at so it's funny because you really did a good job with this character back here. She's in much better in like a much better state. You're doing this thing where you've got your you're alternating straights and angles, and this is what's giving her like a lot of really like dynamic movement. Whereas when we look at Xena over here, we've got bent and bent, bent and bent, right? This is kind of it's a thing that we were like affectionately refer to as starfish pose, because it's everything is kind of like equally bent. Maybe this is a little bit more bent, but overall all of the limbs are kind of doing the same thing. You've even got kind of the hair is kind of bent like that. You've got the overall like shape of the body is bent like this, and it really kind of pulls a lot of the dynamism out of the pose. And so I think where you'd want to be trying to figure out maybe straightening the heck out of this leg, maybe even no. Yeah, I would straighten this leg, and then maybe I think in the thumbnail you had her leg kind of coming a little bit more straight as opposed to like being bent in. I'd really be looking for the places to kind of like add contrast and really get the silhouette here to read clearly too, so that you get a little bit more of a continuation of that motion. Yeah, other things that I'd suggest too is like right now we've got we're trying to show her in a very, very epic light, right? Like she's they're coming over this hill. You've got the like dramatic kind of horse, coming over there with them, and they're fighting basically three dudes and you know like offed one of them already, right? In the grand scheme of things, it's probably not. It doesn't feel as heroic as it probably could be, because you kind of just assume that they're going to win, right? We've got three really kind of scrawny, like scrawny in a relative sense, you know, bad guys, and one that's already dead. And then we've got Xena, who's, you know, like, who's Xena. We've got, I forget what her name is. And then we've also got a horse, right? And so the balance is kind of like three, you know, competent characters against, you know, three not so competent characters. That's a place where I would put, you know, really start to look at like how can we balance the scales in the opposite direction so that we get, you know, like some soldiers, you know, that are like maybe coming up the backside of the hill, you know, and they've literally got her surrounded. But then you can kind of see maybe, you know, this guy who's falling here. We've got one who's like maybe in the process of dying back here. We've got another one who's like clawing over, you know, climbing over his like dead friend to like get to her, and then some more in the background here too. So now we've got like maybe, you know, 10 or 15 guys that are like, you know, coming to like fight them at the hill, and you get that sense of drama, right? It's out of balance, but it's out of balance against the protagonists, and the protagonists are still winning, right? That's kind of the way that you want to set up the story in order to be able to help us understand how we're supposed to be feeling about this. They're overwhelmed, but they're still prevailing. That's like the heroism in the story. Uh, Piece also too, like, you're getting a couple of cool colors in here. Let me see if we can try to. And the only real cool color that you're having is in this like one little peak of the piece. I'm wondering. It's too saturated. Just something to balance out the image a little bit, because everything is so warm. I can even drop the saturation or the opacity on this just a little bit. It's subtle, but it instantly starts to bring in, you know, a little bit more to kind of spread around the cool colors. And that's another thing too, as you're doing this. I know that you're kind of copying or not copying, but like you're influenced by the Frazetta, you know, style, where Frazetta would use kind of a very, very traditional palette, and so the only cool color in the palette was black. I think that works just fine. It's really just a matter of getting in some more desaturated colors in here so that you can start to communicate this like cool color to balance what you've got going on here.
I think it's called the Zorn palette, right?
Zorn, yeah, Andrew Zorn. Last thing too, like as you're kind of, you know, going into the super like heroic poses, I'd say, you know, finding like a real arc to the way that the hair might be moving, or kind of giving it a little bit of a rhythm, will help you, you know, sell that motion of her kind of, you know, really swinging this thing. It might be a little bit more exaggerated than what would happen in real life, but you know, that's kind of what the whole point of the piece is. It's really meant to be, you know, this romanticized view of this action scene. I'm trying to think of what else. Other things that jump out to me are like the same thing with the kind of shapes here when you've got a horse. Really kind of taking a look at horse anatomy and trying to figure out how to like find your shapes to like, you know, bring out the you know, the angularity in here, help up to kind of make the horse feel a little bit more dangerous.
My whole shtick about turning your sixes into nines and like things about the hair and the shape of the mane and all this stuff is just another example of that. Like, interrogate each moment ideally in your sketch phase and determine if the shape or the action is pulling the most narrative weight that it can. Like, Gabrielle stabbing the guy charging up the hill is a great example of this, where it should be a very violent, impactful moment, and it feels kind of weightless and in this moment. Could she be, again, thinking about that before, during, after, could she have speared him and be lifting him off the ground, impaled on that spear? Could he be totally folded over it with the spear coming out his back? Can her hair be, more in line with her body rather than flowing against the pose and things like that?
Yeah, I think the main thing, if I could distill it down to the basic pieces, is like really be cognizant of the shapes that you're making and try not to make the same shape over and over and over again. Really look at trying to amp up the story, both in understanding like where in the action each one of these mini stories is, making that super clear to the viewer, and then really amping up the drama to kind of show, an overwhelming force that they're still having to kind of fight. Whenever you're trying to tell a story about a protagonist, you really kind of want to. Took a class with Ian McKeag a while back, and one of the things that he used to like describe how to tell a compelling story is to basically take your protagonist, put them up in a tree, and start throwing rocks at them, and they make them bigger and bigger rocks until the protagonist eventually figures out a way to get out of that predicament, right? And it can be bigger, and like he starts with rocks, and then it turns into this giant storm, and then we light the tree on fire, and like they get progressively harder and harder challenges until that the protagonist needs to figure out. The viewer is always going to respect and admire the struggle more than they're going to admire the way in which the character wins. If we're telling a story about this ultra marathoner runner who just like wins every time that they run, they're in peak physical condition, they're basically got everything going for them, we're gonna respect that person probably much less than somebody who broke their ankle at the beginning of an ultra marathon and still finish the race, right? Like all you need is that one thing that really kind of becomes a huge detriment, and we celebrate the struggle, much more than we celebrate the win. Sorry, I don't know if you guys can pick up my dog barking, but
yeah. Good.
All right. Beyond that, I'm going to look at, are there any other pieces in here, maybe that from a dark fantasy perspective, that we want to I think there's some cool stuff going on here. I like the design of the bike is kind of like an interesting juxtaposition where it feels a little bit like they're retrofitting an antique, with new technology. I think that's kind of cool. I think fit from just watch out as you're kind of creating characters. This is a pretty common thing. Let's see it in Splash actually a bunch, so we don't have to like fix it in the like early parts of an image. Or the face is just too big for the head. And so really be kind of cognizant of like the like facial anatomy. I would study
ears out of place too.
Yeah,
out of line with the eye.
The kind of figuring out where the jaw I would go, I'm gonna do this like really kind of quick and dirty.
Behold, liquefy.
Yeah.
If you're not using this, perhaps the most used post post edit tool in high fidelity illustration. So.
This is jank as hell, but I think it'll kind of communicate the point.
One thing I want to point about this too, compositionally, is both of your focal characters are running off the page in opposite directions, and where the main character and her bike are exiting the frame in a way that can be cool and imply like speed, but then the main drone that's chasing her is also running off the page, and there's this great big maybe third of the composition diagonally that's just empty.
Yeah.
That could certainly have been used to give more space to the main players in this.
We've got so another thing, kind of from a story perspective. This is a thing that gets outlined a bunch in what is it, Framed Ink. If you don't, if you haven't read the book Framed Ink, I would definitely encourage you to buy it and read each page. Don't just look at the images on the page and try to get the gist of what's going on. Really try to think about, or really try to digest each page and understand what it's trying to communicate. When we look at this, we've got these characters or these drones in the background that are chasing this character in the foreground. The thing that we're communicating though through this image is actually that this character is pretty safe. And that doesn't really allow for, again, like it doesn't really allow for the drama. We want to try to show, a way in which the character is in danger and they're having to overcome that. Because you've got this like big buffer of empty space, we're not really getting the sense that she's in any real danger. It just feels like she's kind of getting away. And so some of the things that we can do are like, really have like some drones that are, catching up to her.
Hold up alongside her.
Yeah, sort of. And then you get kind of the light could be like even blaring, behind her and like flagging her head a bunch. Flagging meaning like or so in like old school paintings, flagging the head was literally like putting a flag behind the head. But it's kind of if we have the light kind of beaming back here.
This too, I think, is maybe speaking. I mean, I think a lot of the dark fantasy stuff that you're referencing lives in, is cool because it can kind of break these rules or bend them. But dark shape on light shape could definitely be used to greater effect in your composing. So.
Yeah. Like, I'd have this thing like way up on her.
Yeah.
And so now we've got these it's like she's literally being kind of enveloped, and if we're giving her a smirk, it probably it's interesting because you can show that she's really powerful by giving the smirk, or that this isn't kind of a really run-of-the-mill type of thing for her. She's probably done this a billion times and she doesn't really care that much. I think giving some semblance of like, just the slightest hint of doubt, of like, oh God, am I going to be able to do this? Maybe I've done this a bunch of times, but like, this is a lot of drones. Like that will help to kind of give more of the sense of drama than the like self-assured, like, I got this. Yeah, other things, just from a like character standpoint. We've got the kind of chest perspective is going this way, but then the rest of the torso is kind of going this way. And then we've got the back kind of hunched over, and you probably want to be able to show like it when you have weight on something, you generally get a little bit of compression, and so you want to kind of show the way in which the weight, you know, that she's got in here is like compressing the like flesh of her hips and stuff like that outward, so that this way you get that sense of weight. Otherwise, like if we're not going to do that, I would actually take her hips like completely off the bike and have her like being, you know, dragged by like the, you know, the speed of the bike. Because right now, by not having the like legs interact with the bike, it's really kind of hard to tell, you know, what like where the weight is, what's kind of moving where.
I hope you were pulling stills from Akira when you were composing this, or else you were leaving money on the table.
Yeah, I think overall those are probably the things that I would say. When it comes to like the overarching rhythm of this piece, this is a thing that I tend to harp on a lot with illustration, right? We've got a primary rhythm that's following this perspective. Perspective generally tends to like create its own rhythm in a piece, especially when we've got like 2 or 3 point perspective, or sorry, 1 and 3 point perspective. So that's great. I think other things that we want to do, like we don't really have much in the way of any other kind of rhythm in the way that this character is interacting with the environment, right? So we've got kind of dead space over here. We've got kind of this area of dead space. This is also basically kind of dead space. And so the only real active parts of the image are here and then there. You know, and so when you look at that, like this, it doesn't really have the sense of understanding like the motion. If we were looking at this piece from a compositional standpoint, we're not getting a clear sense of like the intensity of the image that you're trying to create. We don't get the sense of like this is a you know, a big piece getting kind of chased through, you know, with or chased by these other pieces. Finding a way to like, you know, maybe bring getting 1, 2, 3, and now trying to find elements to kind of give more of a sense of this will really give a sense of now of like, okay, now we've got this element in the foreground, you know, and these other elements that are cascading back into perspective, and then finding the different cues to kind of enhance, you know, whether that's railings or whether that's different things that kind of, you know, continue to reinforce these leading lines. And then from here, you just want to have your character, you know, if it's her head or whatever, breaking through one of those leading lines to create the contrast. And now you've got a really clear sense of rhythm, you know, where the contrast that's breaking that rhythm is, you know, the focal point.
I linked Kelly's Assassin Master Yi in chat as, you know, one of the excellent executions on this composition. Yeah, totally different, right? Like this is showing somebody who's lethal and winning versus somebody that we want to see fleeing and concerned. But yeah, replace dead guards with pursuing drones, and use that compositional space to fill with the bike and the rider, and it's all the same.
Yeah. This was Kelly's first splash from way back in the day.
And it was a fucking goated audition.
Cool. So I think those are kind of the things that they're pretty consistent, I think, in terms of like as you're constructing your images, to just be conscious of the shapes that you're using, try to vary them and have them like emphasize the action that you're trying to create, and really look at the rhythms and your narrative, and just think through like each individual piece. How am I structuring all of the elements to support that main story? But yeah, there's some really good stuff here. I think it's just like a few key things that would really help to um, to bring about the uh, like basically kind of turning the sixes into nines, as Eli had talked about. I dig the design of the bike. Are you a I'm guessing that you're a concept artist who's getting into illustration. Yeah. Um, it's because your designs are pretty good. Yeah. Okay. All right. I am gonna bounce over to the next portfolio. Thank you, Alessandra. Looking forward to seeing more in the future. All right. Who do we have here? Let's scroll through chat. Is this blank you?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, that is my piece. I wanted to know, how can I improve the render of the drawing? The render of drawing. How could I improve in regards to making the colors sing more together in a piece? And any other advice is much appreciated. Here's also my portfolio. If it can help with the critique, sorry if I don't comment after. I want to listen carefully. I see. English is not your second language, or is not your first language. Oh, cool. Okay. I'm just gonna do a quick flip through of your portfolio just to kind of get a sense of maybe patterns or other things that'll help inform the piece itself. Dig that. All right, we've got some really good design work in here. Xerxes, yeah. I kind of like that you skewed younger on Xerxes here. It feels like a thing, you know, I feel like that actually could have been really cool if they made Xerxes like, a child, to really kind of draw the contrast of having, just basically is like winning because of this just overwhelming, enormous force, and having this like kind of contrast of like a frail or like not very formidable kid, but having the force of thousands and thousands of soldiers. That you get kind of a sense of like the impetuousness too, of like not really caring about throwing like thousands of bodies at effectively double digit or like triple digit uh, opposing force. Cool. Okay. So we're looking at this piece and trying to figure out rendering and make the colors sing. I dig it. Let's make these colors sing. Okay. So before we get into the colors, I want to just kind of zoom out from like big shapes or big image making stuff down to like smaller image making stuff. When I look at the drawing, I don't see like too many things that are glaringly wrong. One thing that I would say though is like, again, we've got a lot of things that are basically cutting the image and not really allowing for the movement of, the eye around the piece. And so this is kind of, in a lot of ways, dead space. We've got like one element here, but it's not really helping us transverse this line. Same thing here. We've got another element here, but we've got this dead space here, and we don't have this element helping us to kind of transverse this line. And so from a compositional perspective, we have the character here, but we're not really moving the viewer around the page enough to keep their interest, on what's going on. So some things that I would consider like a really easy one can do is really kind of pushing this into the foreground and having it come forward enough to really overlap. I know the perspective is a little wonky. Doing something like that will help, at least on that side, to kind of bring things forward. And then here too, like, if we've got other elements, maybe we're looking through a door, we can have kind of the light always, like, light is basically your best friend when it comes to from a compositional standpoint. Let's do so it's really simple. But now at least we're kind of getting the eyes being moved around the image a little bit more. Maybe it's a little bit cooler up here, and the sand is actually the thing that push that back a little bit. And now we've got the light, at least we're moving the viewer's eye throughout the piece a little bit more. Other things you can do to kind of really play this up are, we've got this like smoke in the background. Anytime you've got like a VFX or like sorry, my computer's chugging a little bit. I think it's time to upgrade some things. Finding the shape for your VFX, even if that's even if you're going for like a realistic rendering, doing an amorphous shape tends to kind of hurt the composition more than it helps. Why are we chugging this much? I'll close some of this stuff down. Should not be. this much trouble. There we go. Should do this on its own layer. I would definitely take a look at like Josh Smith's work, you know, and look at how he's kind of, you know, treating VFX and stuff. You get a little bit more of a sense of atmosphere, and you can there. So at least now we've got a little bit more in the way of composition to help to move you around the piece a little bit. Now we can start to get into get the inside lip of this door to like actually catch more of that light. You can figure out tangents and stuff like that later. Okay. Next thing. So the way that light works, every time light bounces, it gets filtered, right? And so light, when you combine all of the light together, you've got white, and as it falls off, you generally want to be following kind of an arc. Let me show here. Generally, as an image, you want to be following an arc where, like, as you get toward the midtones, things get slightly more saturated, and more saturated as you kind of get toward the darker areas too. What your image is, like the way that I'm kind of seeing it right now, instead of following this arc to the way that the saturation of your colors works, you're following this arc. That's the reason that the colors aren't singing, right? It's because we've got a bunch of midtones that are sitting in a really desaturated place, and this doesn't really happen in nature. When light gets filtered, it gets more pure, right? You've got white light, it bounces off a blue surface, all of the colors except for blue fade away, and now it's basically being filtered back to your eye, and when light is less white, it's more filtered, it gets more saturated. That's why also when you get into kind of corners of things and light's bouncing around a bunch, every time it bounces it's filtered, and then when it finally gets back to your eye, it's going to be slightly more saturated than when it went in. And so those are things to kind of think about as you're designing your image. When we're getting toward the mid-tone into the shadow area, we want to be saturating as opposed to desaturating. So some things that can, let me pop this back. All right. How do we want to do this? I'm going to copy that layer. I'm going to bump up the saturation on this stuff. I know it's going to blow out the lights a bunch, but that's okay. I'll show you what we're going to do in a second. Bring just a little bit more atmosphere in here as opposed to things falling like completely to dark. And then from here, what we can do is kind of pull out the lights. And leave the saturation in the darks. And then we want to do this. find another like faster way of doing that when I do paint overs. As we're getting in here too, like for midtones and stuff, you want to be thinking about your saturation as your transitional element. So as we get up in here, really getting your like somewhat saturated midtones in here. This can probably be something more like that. Since this light is coming from like the front here, we probably want to have this be a little bit more saturated along the front and fit into a little bit more of a midtone. And then as you're thinking of forms too, really thinking about how you round out this form. When you've got a cylinder like this, you've got your kind of lights on the top. Your lights on the top, you've got a like a core shadow here, and then probably bringing in, it's probably not the right color. Let's do that. A little bit of reflected light, especially since these ropes are probably like silk or kind of that decorative, you know, they're gonna end up reflecting a lot more of that light. And you can kind of do that, you know, judiciously, like with the rest of the image here, or the rest of the ropes that you've got here, you know, finding your kind of main light, letting that really sing, and then having your reflected light kind of be a thing that helps to round out the form. Okay, other things. So we've got white, we've got, let me see if I can pull open. Oh, this is actually really good. It's a good example. I've got this thing in Chrome where whenever I open a new tab, there we go. That's probably not good. There we go. We're taking a look at materials